David Campese won the Rugby World Cup twice. The first time, he achieved this with just one pass, a single blind pass, made without looking over his shoulder. It was a breathtaking move that the players had never seen before. They were left completely speechless, paralyzed and gaping in amazement. The second time, weeks later, he won it without touching the ball at all. He won it with his mouth. This is the story of how a team that had never won anything in its life talked, tackled, and conjured its way to the very top of the rugby world. It is also the story of the 30 seconds in Dublin where the whole thing nearly collapsed before it began. This is 1991. This is thunder from down under. To understand why 1991 mattered so much, you have to understand where Australian rugby actually stood. The answer is, not at the top. The first Rugby World Cup, in 1987, had been won by New Zealand, the All Blacks, the undisputed kings of the sport, a team that seemed to operate on a different plane from everyone else. Rugby's power lived in the Southern Hemisphere, and within the Southern Hemisphere it lived in New Zealand. Australia were good. Australia were entertaining. But Australia were not champions of anything, and there was no guarantee they ever would be. The 1991 tournament was different from the start. For the first time it was staged in the Northern Hemisphere, spread across the 5 nations of the old 5 Nations Championship: England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and France. Autumn skies. Cold, heavy pitches. Crowds who wanted the Southern Hemisphere teams to fail. If Australia were going to win this thing, they were going to have to do it away from home, in hostile territory, against the best teams on earth, one after another. But this Australian side had something. Look at the names. The captain was Nick Farr-Jones, a scrum half with the calm of a man who had never once panicked in his life. Outside him at fly half was Michael Lynagh, the vice-captain, the metronome, one of the greatest goal kickers the game has ever produced, a man who scored points the way other people breathe. In the centres were Tim Horan and Jason Little, 2 young Queenslanders widely regarded as the best midfield pairing in world rugby. The pack was mobile and mean, and it contained a 21-year-old lock in his very first season for Australia, a young man named John Eales, of whom you will hear more, both in this story and, 8 years later, in another one entirely. There was the immense Tongan-born forward Willie Offengang. There was the veteran flanker Simon Poidevin. And in charge of all of it was the coach Bob Dwyer, a man who had thought harder about how to win a World Cup than almost anyone alive. And then, out wide, there was Campese. David Campese was the most gifted, the most infuriating, the most watchable rugby player on the planet. He played the game like jazz, improvised, unpredictable, occasionally disastrous, frequently sublime. He would finish the tournament as its joint top try-scorer, with 6. He beat defenders with a goose step that made grown men look foolish. And he talked. He talked constantly, cheerfully, and without mercy, about opponents, about tactics, about anyone he considered too timid to play the game the right way. Campese was a genius who happened to also be a provocateur, and in 1991 both of those things would matter enormously. Here was the mountain in front of them. To win the World Cup, Australia would almost certainly have to beat Ireland in Dublin, then the defending champions New Zealand, and then, in all likelihood, the host nation England at Twickenham. 3 knockout games. 3 away crowds. No margin for a single bad afternoon. The first bad afternoon nearly ended everything. The quarter-final was against Ireland, at Lansdowne Road in Dublin, and on paper it should have been comfortable. Australia were heavy favourites. Ireland were a modest side having a decent tournament. For most of the match the form held. And then, in the closing minutes, the unthinkable began to happen. An Irish flanker named Gordon Hamilton broke loose, and he ran, chased by Campese, of all people, and Campese could not catch him. Hamilton crashed over in the corner. Ireland 18, Australia 15. Lansdowne Road did not so much cheer as detonate. The favourites were losing. Ireland were minutes away from a World Cup semi-final, and Australia was staring at the end of the road. What happened next tells you everything about this team. With the clock running down, Australia won a penalty in a kickable position. The safe thing, the obvious thing, was to take the points, tie the game, and go to extra time. Farr-Jones and Lynagh looked at each other and decided not to. They tapped it and ran. Phase after phase, closer and closer to the Irish line, the crowd screaming, the seconds vanishing, until Michael Lynagh, the fly-half, slid over in the corner himself. 1918. Australia had survived by a matter of seconds and by a refusal to blink. A lesser team panics and takes the draw. This team backed itself to score. That nerve, that specific, unglamorous refusal to fold, is the thread that runs through the entire campaign. If the quarter-final was about survival, the semi-final was about genius. Now came New Zealand, the defending champions. A team that, across 2 World Cups, had never lost a single match, 10 games, 10 wins. To beat them you had to be nearly perfect, and at Lansdowne Road on the 27th of October, Australia were. Campese scored early, cutting an angle that no defence could account for. And then, 6 minutes before half-time, came the moment that outlived the entire tournament. Lynagh chipped the ball ahead. Campese gathered it at pace. He turned the all-black wing John Eales inside out, beat the fullback Kieran Crowley with a step, and then, with Eales closing on him again and no obvious pass available, he threw the ball backwards over his right shoulder without looking, straight into the hands of the supporting Tim Horan, who ran in under the posts. The miracle pass. Players still describe it with a kind of disbelief, because it should not have worked, because no coaching manual on earth teaches a man to do that, because it was pure instinct dressed up as impossibility. Lynagh converted. 13-0 at half-time. In the second half New Zealand threw everything they had at the Wallaby defence, and the Wallaby defence did not break. The champions could not score a try. Not one. The match finished 16-6. The greatest team in the world had been beaten, and had been beaten for the first time in World Cup history, and it was Australia who had done it. The Wallabies were in the final. Which brings us back to Campese's mouth. In the build-up to the final, Campese had a lot to say about England, and none of it was kind. He called them boring. He called them negative. He said over and over, to anyone who would print it, that England were too frightened to actually play rugby, that all they knew how to do was grind, and maul, and kick, and squeeze the life out of a game. And the infuriating thing, from an English point of view, was that he wasn't entirely wrong. England had reached the final by playing a brutal, forward-dominated, attritional style. It was not pretty. It had ground France into the dirt in Paris and edged Scotland in the rain. But it worked. It was, for England, exactly the right way to win. And then, at the biggest moment of their lives, England stopped doing it. Stung by the criticism, by the mood around the tournament, by the sense that the world wanted to see a spectacle, England walked out at Twickenham on the 2nd of November and tried to play expansive, running rugby, a style they had spent the whole tournament avoiding, a style they had not mastered and did not trust. Their own forwards were appalled. Jason Leonard, Brian Moore, Peter Winterbottom, the men winning the ball up front, were reportedly furious, telling their captain again and again to go back to what had got them there. England were dominating possession. They were winning the physical battle. And they were throwing it away by trying to be something they weren't. Campese had got exactly the game he wanted, and he had got it without doing anything at all except talk.